Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're joining you live on your favorite social media platforms. We're talking about LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Melissa Palmer. I'm from the Office of the CTO here at Veeam, and I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Aaron Murphy. Aaron, how are you today?
Doing great, Melissa. Looking forward to this chat. It's going to be fun.
Now, we're going to talk about one of mine and Aaron's favorite topics today, but I have a couple housekeeping items before we get started. As you can see, we have closed captioning on. If you'd like to turn that off, you can find that in the lower right corner of your screen. Now, most importantly, we want this to be interactive, so ask us your questions in the comments and let us know from where you're from. We're going to pop up a map and give you shout outs to wherever you're watching from today. Thanks for joining us on this Friday, and let's get started. So this is one of my favorite things I've been talking about at Veeam lately. Cyber attacks are disasters. And I think that we're going to find that maybe a lot of people aren't looking at it this way. What do you think, Aaron?
I think they're thinking it's something entirely different, but the results are the same. And the things you do to help you with disasters and the things you do with ransomware are exactly the same.
All right, so let's move on. This is our friend Michelle. She's joined me and Rick on LinkedIn Live before, and she's sitting in her data center. Things aren't going so well. She thinks it's fine, but as you could tell by the servers on fire around her, they actually aren't. And there's so many different types of disasters. I know when I hear disaster, I usually think of the traditional, okay, fire, flood, natural disaster. But Aaron, can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen on the disaster front before?
Well, I think probably most of these. I think my first one was, self-inflicted. I was working late at night and deleted everything, and fortunately, I had a backup, and I was able to put everything back before anybody noticed and keep my job. So that was good. I was only young then, but I think my first real disaster it covers two of those things. It was a hardware failure and a fire at the same time. A disk array set on fire due to some disk that was creating friction and nearly burned down the whole data center.
So that could be a little bit of a problem. I know Aaron and I actually come from the same state in the United States right now. We're both in New Jersey, and a number of years ago, I remember I was a systems engineer at the time. We had a big disaster, Hurricane Sandy, and I had lots of customers that were just basically down for a very long time. And some of them didn't even actually have disaster recovery plans. So they figured, hey, what is the likelihood of a hurricane rolling in here and flooding my data center? Spoiler alert, it was a lot more than they thought it was. So let's talk a little bit more about the impacts of downtime. If we go to the next slide, the first thing we of course think about is, okay, we're going to lose money if we're down. And I think that's something that every customer, it immediately pops into their mind. But Aaron, come on, what other things kind of jump out at you here?
Well, first off, I wanted to give a shout out to our BPR research. I think it's incredibly well written, incredibly good set of questions that are kind of very much related to each other. So if you hadn't had a look at that, please do. And what I noticed was there was a correlation of all the things that were going on. People were engaging more in digital transformation, which was an attempt to reach more customers, engage their customers more. This often involved moving to the cloud more, right? So then they were trying new things. They didn't have the technical skills, but they knew that if they reached more customers would be engaged and rely upon them for the services. And of course, then they started to worry about, oh my word, the impact if I'm down for an extended period of time is going to be even worse, because customers are going to lose confidence, the brand is going to be damaged. Maybe the customer starts to think, is this company, worth doing my business if they're down for this time? So I could see that relationship between all these things going on in the survey.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, everybody's thinking of like, how much money does it cost if we're down? But there's some softer things here that also translate into money too, right? Loss of customer confidence. If you're going to use a specific product or service and it doesn't work, are you really going to want to use it again? Are you going to look for a better alternative? That kind of goes with some of the brand loyalty stuff and employee confidence, right? How do you feel as an employee when you go to log into work one day, you see this big ransomware screen or whatever, and you can't work for however much time? There's just
oh yeah, definitely.
there's just so many of these different things that come into play, and legal action, revocation of licenses and accreditations. But I got to give a shout out to the 8% out there that really have their stuff together. Besides losing money, they've figured out a way around everything else. But the fact of the matter is there's so many things out there that go wrong when you're down, especially for a prolonged time period.
Yeah, I guess it depends who you ask. I think we got something later on. What happens if you ask IT about how confident they are?
Yeah, somebody might have had some rose-colored glasses on when they filled this out, I think.
Yeah, I think the impact on the brand, I think, was felt. I noticed in the report, particularly by retail and finance. The customers rely on it. If you can't get to your money, if you can't manage your accounts, it's a disaster for you, right, personally. So it impacts a lot of people, and probably the whole industry and the whole interconnected industry of organizations relying on you as a part of that industry. So it's widespread in its effects.
Absolutely. So going on, this is probably my favorite slide I have in every PowerPoint deck I've been using for, I don't know, the last year or so. I just want to remind you all why we're hearing today. Cyber attacks, specifically ransomware, right? Because that's probably some of the most popular right now. And a lot of those cyber attacks will ultimately lead to ransomware today, right? With some of those crazy ransomware as a service groups that they just kind of pay hackers to get in there and then give them the ransomware. Ransomware is a disaster. I mean, what do you think about this statement, Aaron?
Well, even just now, just before we were preparing for this morning, I saw a Twitter survey that came in. It just shocked me that nearly 1/5 of organizations were forced to lay off employees due to the financial pressures of following a ransomware attack. So I was at first I was thinking just about the business and the impacts on the business and the people trying to bring things back in line, but then there's the personal effect of it, right? And it really touched me quite deeply there because I always worry for people who lose their jobs and stuff. So it really is a disaster. Don't want to overstate it.
Yeah, and it's something that we don't think of. Like, I know even me, when I hear disaster recovery, I go right back to the, okay, fire, flood, power outage, something, right? Something more tangible, something that we don't have control of, not that we have control of ransomware with. And I think a lot of the problems that I've seen when it comes to disaster recovery planning is somebody is sitting in an office someplace, they're taking a look at risk versus reward. They calculate that downtime. It's going to cost us X amount. But you know what? The risk of any of these natural disasters is so statistically low. Maybe we won't protect this application. Maybe we're just gonna deal with the loss of revenue because that's less than it would be to actually fix the problem.
Yeah, there's different things with it, right? When people plan for natural disasters, they look at the compute sometimes, and then they forget about the human logistics of having an office and places to go. Well, maybe now we've all learned to work from home. That's probably not the problem anymore. But with ransomware, they've got to rely on the fact they have no access to anything potentially, right? So I had this one story that got relayed to me as an oil and gas customer, and they came in on the Monday. And they had, imagine, if you will, a black screen with white writing that says everything is encrypted. Email this account to unlock it all, right? And they're completely shut out, right? And where do you go from there? You've got nothing online apart from that.
Now that we've set the stage that ransomware is a disaster, unfortunately, it's a disaster that can be felt across the globe, no matter what kind of weather you're encountering. So let's head over to the map and see who's tuned in today. So thank you again so much to all of our viewers. In the United States, we have people watching from Connecticut, Ohio, and Texas. Welcome so much. We also have our producer, Mark, tuning in from Atlanta. If we head on over to Europe, we've got Ireland, Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, and the Czech Republic. Shout out to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday evening. I hope you're enjoying a fine beverage right now. Hi, Brazil. Thanks for tuning in. There are viewers from South America. And then we've got so many people watching. Oh my goodness. We have Morocco, Tunisia, Angola, Botswana, Ghana, South Africa, and more.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia. We've got the United Arab Emirates, got India, Iran, South Africa. I mean, I'm doing some of these from memory, not all of them, but I've been to a few of these places. Very nice.
India and Bangladesh. Thank you so much, everybody, to tuning in to us today. So don't forget to keep those locations coming, because we're going to head back to the map later and see who else is watching. And the statistics of ransomware are pretty much everywhere, no matter where you are in the world, right? Maybe you're inland and you're like, hey, I never had to deal with a hurricane ever. We don't get those here. I bet you get ransomware where you are. The forecast for ransomware is pretty much always cloudy.
Oh dear, what they off.
I'm cracking Aaron up. So where do we start when it comes to recovering from ransomware? Okay, we've probably scared everybody. They're ready for ransomware. But that's kind of a thing. Like, where do we start, Aaron? Where do we start when it comes to recovering from ransomware?
Well, this is what I always say. You if you don't have a good copy of the data and it isn't secure, you've got nothing to work with, right? And that must be the first thing you must start with is making sure you have a good copy of data and you protected it in all the ways that are feasible, air gapping and immutability and all those kind of things. That's lesson number one.
And that's the great thing with Veeam, right? Because we're a software design solution, there is so much flexibility when you're trying to design a solution to protect your specific organization against ransom, right? There's so many different ways to deploy it, architect it, design it, that I'm sure with Veeam, you can come up with a solution to protect you. But let's talk about recovery plan and go to the next slide. What happens when it's actually time to recover? I have a huge spoiler alert here. If you get ransomware, your disaster recovery plan is a great place to start recovering from. Because remember, ransomware is a disaster, but I have a couple caveats for you. If you really want to use that disaster recovery plan to recover from ransomware, it's got to be a couple things, right? It has to be well documented. You need to know what you're recovering, how you're recovering it, and where it's going. It also needs to be up to date. That disaster recovery plan from a year ago, if you've deployed new servers, is pretty much useless, right? And it has to be recently and thoroughly tested. I mean, what do you think about using a disaster recovery plan to kind of get started with your ransomware recovery planning?
Well, it's one of those. It's one of the things I find quite amazing in our software. All the things we've thought of, with the plan not being something that could even be a hard copy. So when all the computer systems are down, you have something there. It's thoroughly tested. It's got changes in it. Every time you change something, you install patches, upgrade software, and put in new systems. You can rerun the testing, and it can give you the outcome. And it's the zero impact on production systems, but there's 100% impact on your confidence, which is kind of what I really love about it.
Exactly. And, these are the hardest things about disaster recovery planning, right? Making sure that your documentation is kept up to date and actually accurate, and then actually doing your test, right? And the great news is that Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator automates this for you, right? It's automatically going to generate your DR documents. It's got a full change log to, hey, I set up my DR plan. It looks great, but Aaron logged in last night and did something he shouldn't have, but I can catch that before it becomes a problem. It also is going to run those DR tests for you. Really easy to do. You could even schedule them, say, okay, I'm going to have DR test Tuesday, and every Tuesday I'm going to run a DR test. And, what is one of the ways that ransomware gets into an environment? Exploits, vulnerabilities, right? We need to keep those environments up to date and patched. We can use our DR testing environment to do that patching as well, right? So run that DR test, leave it running, test those patches, know they're good, and roll it out to production. So this is one way that Veeam can radically simplify your disaster recovery plan for your VMware vSphere environment.
Yeah, I like to think of it, and I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, so bear with me. I like to think of it as something that helps you keep match fit. It helps you keep fit for a sport. And I think of sporting events. I like sport, follow a lot of sport, being a sportsman. And there was one sportsman from the recent Olympics I was reading about. Eliud Kipchoge is the Kenyan runner, is a double Olympic champion. And what's that got to do with ransomware, you may ask? But he runs a marathon. It's an extreme event. It's difficult. It takes a lot out of the body and a lot of preparation, a bit like recovering from a ransomware event, unless you got the right training. And what he said was, he prepares in other ways, strength and fitness and physical conditioning and core training. But every 2 weeks, he has to run the marathon event at marathon speed in real time, like it's a real thing, because that's the only way to be race prepared for when he becomes when he runs a race, and that's how he becomes a champion. And I almost feel like it's the same thing with disaster recovery planning. You have to be able to test it regularly, every 1 week, every 2 weeks, And by doing that, you're becoming match fit and ready for that event when it happens.
Exactly. And if we go on to the next slide, that's something that is being widely recognized in the industry, right? Everybody is kind of saying, hey, you have to be ready. You have to actually do these things and you can prepare. Aaron, can you break this down a little bit for us?
So I read a lot of things from industry groups and government-sponsored groups, like NIST here in the US, or I'm originally from the UK, if you haven't guessed that my accent wasn't from New Jersey. And this is one from the UK National Cyber Security Centre, and they didn't. Well, this wasn't a flag waving; it's from the UK, so it must be right. But what I looked at this and I thought there were lots of good advice in this outside of data protection and recovery and all those things. But there were some things that were pertinent to data protection and recovery, and I almost felt like they looked at the Veeam manual and said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to recommend, because it literally explains everything that we recommend. Keep offsite copies, make multiple copies, make them air-gapped, make them immutable, have a mechanism for scanning restores so you don't reintroduce malware into your environment. I mean, it's like, yeah, this is Veeam. And then in the planning, ensure you have incident response and documentation materials that are available without a computer. and test it frequently as much.
Wait, you mean that if there's ransomware, I might not be able to use my computer? Really?
I have seen other vendors, like stare blankly when you say that's a requirement, and they're like, well, I'll just log on and download it. No, you won't. It's a secure document. It's a secure document. You weren't allowed to put it on a public sharing site without a proper security. Therefore, you no longer have access to it.
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot of stuff myself with NIST and the NIST framework. And again, if you go and read some of this guidance, it seems like, to me at least, as someone who's been in the IT industry for a while and like very focused on infrastructure and recovery for a very long time, seems like kind of a no-brainer, right? We need to have backups. Anybody who doesn't have backups today, you're kind of missing the point. One of the earliest things I actually learned in my career, I'll never forget this. It was when I was an SE for a storage company, and I was trying to design a backup repository. And the customer kept telling me, we need to meet our backup window. We need to meet our backup window. So I'm like trying to figure out how fast can I get this thing to ingest the data and blah, blah, blah. So I called in like a higher level systems engineer, right, that specialized in data protection. And he's like, well, what's their RTO? I'm like, I don't know what their RTO is. They just told me they have to meet your backup window. He goes, no, you're missing the whole point, and they are too. How long is it going to take them to recover? How long do they need to recover? And I said, they just wanted to meet their backup. And he goes, no, go back, have another discussion, because if you can't actually recover, it doesn't matter how fast your backups are, right? It doesn't matter that I met my backup window. If I can't do anything with those backups afterwards, they don't mean anything. And that's one of the reasons testing your backups and your recovery plan is so important, right? If you can't actually recover in a real world scenario, I mean, what's kind of the point, right? I need to see a lot of disaster recovery plans out there that are designed for compliance purposes, right? I need to go into the data center for the weekend with my clipboard and make sure that I can make all the green check marks because we want to be in compliance. If you're not testing real world, full scale recovery, you're missing the boat right now.
Yeah, you're singing from my song sheet on that one. I've always tried to do that myself in advising customers. And I think the other thing is classifying systems rather than just putting them all into one bucket and saying one size fits all, because there are some systems that have got to come back first. Those are the systems people are waiting on to conduct business. And do you even know what those are? And sadly, a lot of times that's not understood by the people who have to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And again, one of the great things with Veeam is that no matter what type of data we're dealing with, if we're dealing that mission critical data, we're going to protect with CDP, all the way down to, regular replicas, storage integrations, or just backups, right? I'm going to back this up once a day because, it's kind of important, but it's not the most critical. You're going to use the same tools, the same software, the same workflows, right, to protect and recover those applications. So if you've done one, you can do them all, but you're just protecting your different criticalities of data. So that's one of my favorite things about Veeam, actually, is it's the same software for everything, right? There's no, well, I have to go teach my ops people 3 different programs because we're going to do the mission critical workload this way, and we got to restore from backup. But we have those like middle of the road replica things that we have to worry about. Now you're going to use one simple tool with Veeam, same software for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical thing, and people just don't plan for it. And I think there's an opportunity to actually improve the effectiveness of recovery across the whole business as a whole, because maybe you're giving too much resource and too much capability to a system that's not as important. You can divert things to things that are really important and maybe up the bar for everything. And you can maybe do it and save money at the same time if you've got a system like Veeam, which can work for every service level.
All right, so let's check back in on the map. I think we have some new people joining us. Thank you all for tuning in. If we start in the United States and North America, we've got Wisconsin, Indiana, and Colorado joining us. Hello, everyone. We also have Mexico tuning in. Thank you for joining us. Heading on over to South America, we have Chile joining us. Thanks for tuning in. And then if we head on over, we also have Nigeria and Malaysia. Thank you everybody so much for joining us on Friday night.
Superb, love it.
So let's go and talk about a couple things. And this is, I think, one of Aaron's favorite things that we're going to talk about. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about the reality gap. And this is scary. Aaron, can you break this down for us?
Yeah, again, I keep shouting out to our research, but
it's great stuff.
It's great stuff. But this one really concerned me, and again, back to some of the NIST guidelines and other governmental guidelines. Organizations that are have got obligatory regulations against recovery, that they must do it within a time frame that they've published and defined. I hope these guys don't have this problem, because what the survey told us across the board in all industries, there was what I call, it's not so much a reality gap as a reality chasm between what the business thought they were getting or was going to happen and what IT could achieve. So to sum it up, if they had a disaster and they were going to do a recovery, the business was going to find out way too late that their systems were going to be out of action for much longer than they thought, and that they were going to lose much more data than expected. What, lose data?
It's all That's never a good thing.
It's all just magic. It goes into the cloud and it's kept forever and no one has to do anything about it, right? And I found that incredible that such a gap existed and continues to exist. I mean, it's always existed, but as we're re-architecting and moving more to the cloud, and I don't know if it's business expectations that went up because everything looked so simple or what, but it certainly has to be dealt with. And we just talked about it on the previous slide. I think it is critical as a takeaway that business and IT sit down and define this. What is the critical service, or each critical service? Design and estimate how much it's going to take to meet that, and how much it's going to cost, and is that cost acceptable and affordable? And you got to work it around. If it's too expensive, is there a next best option? Is that acceptable? And go through each one. And the good news is, as we've mentioned, we can provide the best level of automated recovery for different costs. We can use backups, replicas, snapshots, or continuous data protection in the recovery plans.
Yeah, and this is where it always kind of breaks usually, is the IT in the business, right? We got to get everybody in the same room, all the different stakeholders, and really dive into that business impact analysis. That's something that not a lot of people do often. Maybe we do it once, we kind of classify our applications, but we never go back to it. And the fact is, times change. We need to know, what are the truly critical applications, and how do we usually figure that out? If you go back to our impact slide, it usually comes down to revenue, right? Depending on what industry you're in, right? It might be a little different. If you're in kind of the healthcare industry, you might have a different idea of what is the most important thing. It might not be revenue, it might be keeping the systems on because they're supporting patients, it might be different there. But it comes back to all these different things in revenue, right? So we have to tie that back. We have to sit down and say, okay, let's classify this applications. How much does it cost us if it's down for X amount of time? And that's where that time point comes in as well, right? Because we're saying we think that we can recover in 4 hours, but maybe it's actually going to take us 8. That's a huge disconnect right there. And we might protect that data differently for a 4-hour versus an 8-hour type of recovery. It really comes down to testing too. We have to be able to test this, right? Run a disaster recovery test, and you're going to find that, hey, guess what? We can't actually recover those systems in time. And that is okay, right? You want to find that out before the disaster. So a lot of people don't want to run the test because they don't want to fail, or it takes too much time or whatever. Run that test, get your baseline so you can actually go back and improve upon it later on.
Yeah, no, it's. I think, and there was one of the comments in the articles which is testament to the same thing. Tried and true from Reginald there. Use the three to
That's a
one
great
rule.
comment.
Make an air gap. I mean, it's what we're saying here. But I've the idea that I've tested it and I've got all those green lights that tell me that all the other times I've tested it, it's worked, and I know nothing has changed because I can keep seeing what's changed, and I know it's not going to have an impact, and knowing it's going to work. I mean, it's so just good for peace of mind, I would say, because for all those people who've been in IT or are still in IT, they've ever had to do it, it's a very terrifying thing, right? To be sitting there under pressure, waiting for things to come back and hoping it's going to work, but it's much better knowing it's going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just found out that we had a couple more viewers tune in. Thank you for tuning in, Uganda and North Carolina. So we're at a total of 26 countries, 9 from Africa, which I think is the most we've ever had tuning in from Africa. Thank you all for joining us so much, and 9 different US states. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, don't forget to leave them in the comments. But now let's talk about some resources for the things we just told you today, because Veeam is all about the resources. Couple things to remember. And if you don't take anything away from today except for this, I want it to be that ransomware is a disaster, and it is so much more likely to happen than any of the other traditional disasters you've ever planned for. So now is the time to take a look at your disaster recovery plans and figure out, are they in a good state or do they need work? For all of my VMware vSphere friends out there, I want you to go download a 30-day free trial of Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. Whether or not you are a Veeam customer today, it has everything you need to test everything we told you out for yourself. It comes with an embedded version of Veeam backup and replication that you can kind of get hands-on with and do everything from soup to nuts, from protecting your data to recovering it. And we also have a brand new white paper, hot off the presses, recently updated, 5 ransomware protection best practices to help you make sure that you're doing stuff right today before ransomware strikes.
Yeah, and one last thing: if you're in IT and you know there's a reality gap, I'd recommend you speak up and read these resources, learn about it, learn what's possible, and then speak up.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. And don't forget to tune in next week, too. We have some great shows planned. On Monday, we have our usual characters of Jason and Dave from our team that are going to be joined by Michael Cade, talking about everything caching in Kubernetes. And then Friday, we're going to flip back to community, and Rick will be back on his normal Bat channel, along with Ksenia, and they'll be talking about the Veeam Legends.
Okay,
Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday, no matter where you are.